Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video, we're back with another top 10 video for Survivor, where at the end of Survivor 48, I did say that I wanted to update my top 10 players of the new era video, which I will still be doing that. However, I do also want to do another video kind of connected to that being my top 10 worst players of the new era, where obviously I'm doing this after Survivor 48, so we have 8 seasons to be assessing here. And straight up, this is actually a very difficult list to put together. I actually had a very tough time coming up with this list, to the point where I actually do feel like I have to come up with a different philosophy than what I typically have with my worst players of all time. Where, again, on my worst players of all time list, it's usually a lot of players that were taken out the first opportunity, and people that still did a lot actively wrong, but still a lot of people that did not make it particularly deep into the game, many of which being, again, won the first few boots of their seasons. With the new era here, it actually is pretty difficult to do that, where I feel like with the new era, obviously being against smaller tribes, all these advantages and twists being thrown around, it actually leads to this not being super clear cut on who I think is the worst player. So actually, there are going to be a decent amount of people on the list here that made it like relatively deep into the game. Some people that even survived a few tribals, which is, again, is kind of rare on my top 10 worst of all time list. But again, I think for the new era in particular, again, there's just so much variance and everything going on that I think this list will be primarily more focused on actively poor play. For while there still will be this aspect of this list being favored against those that don't survive tribals through social strategy means, I do feel like this is a list that, again, feels a bit different structurally than my worst players of all time list. But before we get to the actual ranking itself, I have a lot of honorable mentions. Again, I'm going to go in chronological order of when they were booted. Starting it off, season 41, I will mention Sarah Wilson, who I don't think is actually that bad of a player, but obviously she gets taken out her first opportunity. Though, again, I think definitely like aspects of like physical strength played a factor there, and though I don't think she does like that much wrong, and at least put up a fight by the end, so again, she's not on the list. JD is someone I definitely considered here as somebody that, again, does make a lot of mistakes towards the end of his game, but I do think, again, there's at least some like versatility in his game, while, again, he was very blatant in what he was doing, and people just started to not trust him and wanted him out by the time of second vote. I feel like he, at least in that first round, again, was kind of in the middle of things, and then, again, does survive over Brad, to where ultimately, again, he was close to making the top 10, though he didn't make it on. Jeannie is also someone I considered, where Jeannie's like kind of in this tough spot where I think she would be a lot more contention had she not made it to like the final 3 of her tribe. I mean, she's in a spot where she survives over Sarah, survives over Brad, survives over JD, in a spot where she wasn't in any true danger for those first couple votes. I do think there's obviously the criticism of the fact that, again, her number 1 was Brad, and Brad was more loyal to Shan, someone who wasn't loyal to him, where, again, I think that is very bad. And obviously at the end, the way she gets like tricked into not looking for the idol, I think is also bad. But really, I feel like Jeannie, again, surviving that many tribals, almost getting to the merge despite going to almost every tribal for the merge, again, I think it was good enough to not be top 10, though, again, it was another consideration. Also, I had to consider Sydney, and Sydney's this weird case where, again, I have her highly ranked on my merge boot ranking because, again, she shouldn't have been the merge boot. I think she was screwed over and how she goes out. However, she was likely the first boot from her original tribe throughout most of the season. So again, it's not like she played a particularly great game in the grand scheme of things. I do feel like she's someone that most people just seem to not trust and want out, but ultimately I felt like her being screwed out of the game was something that, again, left her off the top 10. Now moving on to 42, I did consider Jackson Fox. And Jackson Fox is this weird case where I actually think genuinely Jackson Fox is a top 10 worst player on this list. Again, when I eventually get around to ranking every Survivor player, again, he will be in the bottom 10 of the new era players. However, I feel like with this list in particular, it feels strange to do that. It feels like this should be a list, again, more so prioritizing actively bad gameplay. And through that, again, it just feels weird to have Jackson on there in a spot where, again, Jackson really didn't really get to play the game that much. Mind you, again, from what we know post-show, it does seem like he would have been the first boot from Tuku had they ever gone the tribal, to where, again, I still think he is probably the worst player from 42, but I just felt like, again, in terms of this list in particular, one that, again, is supposed to be focused around actively bad play, I don't feel like he did enough actively bad to be on the list. Now, again, I'll mention Zach Wertenberger as the first, like, formal boot, but realistically, again, Zach's someone that didn't really do that much wrong. I just think he got a really bad starting tribe. Didn't really have that much of a chance to save himself. So, again, obviously not going to be highly ranked amongst all players, I don't feel like he made the top 10 worst here. Next, I'm moving on to Mariah, who I think at a point I would have said would have been one of the worst players, though through Exit Press, it does seem like Mariah is someone that wouldn't have been the first boot from her tribe. It seemed like it would have been Jackson instead. I give her like a little bit of grace in that, and the fact that, again, also her number 1 ally in the game got taken out at the very beginning. Now, at the end of the day, she was still at the bottom of the Tuku power structure, but I don't feel like there's enough like actively bad play to be in the top 10 worst here. Also, I considered Swathi, someone that, again, did play actively bad. I I mean, she did really overplay her hand, making deals with everybody, got caught, got taken out. Again, pretty bad, especially when she's being saved over Tori, someone that, again, was not particularly liked by her other tribe mates as well, where, again, I think definitely one that I very much contemplated being on this list, though I think Swathi had a good-ish start to her game, where it seemed like she was kind of riding the middle, and did at least survive a tribal, so again, Swathi did not make it on. Also, I consider Daniel Strunk as someone that obviously blows up his game as well. A pretty disastrous downfall for his game. I'll say the one thing I'll give Daniel Strunk credit for is that I think he was kind of screwed to be in that position to begin with. Again, he was in a position where obviously that Jenny tribal happens, and again, that was just a spot where had people not lost their votes, Daniel Strunk would have been in a decent position to at least make it to the merge. So where, again, I do think he actively plays it all wrong once that situation happens, but I think for him to be in that situation to begin with was unlucky. So again, didn't make the top 10. Also, I very much considered Lydia, and Lydia is one of these that I think might make the top 10 if I did not primarily focus on actively bad play, because I think Lydia is a player that, again, like should have been the first boot of her season. It had not been for people losing their votes. Again, she goes home first from her tribe, then is proceeded to be the first boot at the merge. Spot where her closest ally lets her go and no one else is willing to fight for her. To where, again, I think Lydia plays a lackluster game, but again, I think there's not as much like actively bad play from Lydia on this season. She does actually survive a tribal where Daniel Strunk goes home, and even in the spot where she does go home, again, it is the hourglass twist. So again, there's some wonkiness there. So again, she didn't make the top 10. Now moving on to 43, I did consider Mariah, just again, first boot, but again, another one that again just didn't really do that much wrong. Did actually have allies initially. Simply just didn't keep her do the physical strength. So again, she didn't make the top 10. I'll mention Justine just because Justine's another one that I think had some actively bad play, particularly in her treatment of Jessie on the season. But at the same time, again, she had half the tribe on her side. Well, again, they were going to split the vote, and she probably still goes down to 3-2-1. I still think in that spot she wouldn't have been one of the worst players of the new era. So again, she didn't make my top 10. Also, I consider Ryan Medrano, who's the first like person to make it deep into the game that I'm mentioning here. And again, Ryan is someone that I did very much consider making the list simply because, again, he was kind of a disaster. Again, he's someone that I think was largely kept around due to physical strength early on, but even then he was playing disastrously. He threw a challenge in a spot where he was on the bottom. He loses his number one ally in Geo fairly early on. He was going to lose his number one ally at that first vote had it not been for Lindsay blowing up her game. And then beyond that, again, he is just kind of on the bottom of the majority to the point where he eventually gets taken out in the split tribal. Mind you, again, the reason why he's not in the top 10 here is because, one, I think he got an unlucky draw off the split tribal, how all that played out. Also, again, he at least was in the majority for actually like a decent chunk of votes after the merge, where again, he's involved in Ellie, Dwight, and Janine going out, to where, again, I think there's at least enough there to not be in the top 10, though he does have some actively poor play early on. Now moving on to 44, I did consider Maddie. Obviously, again, first boot of the season, if we're taking out the Bruce Medevac, but again, the first formal boot of the season, one that just was a big flame out. Again, the fact that she targets Brandon in a spot where she knows as an idol is pretty idiotic, though I will say, again, she gets out of the game in a spot where almost no one voted, to where I feel like there's reasons for her to not be in the top 10, even though I think her play there was pretty sloppy. Also, I'll consider Helen Lee, obviously the first formal boot from the Tika tribe, and would possibly be in the top 10 worst if I wasn't prioritizing like actively bad play, where again, I don't think Helen does that much actively wrong, but someone that, again, was just on the bottom, didn't really have a chance to save herself, didn't really have many inroads there. Also just kind of instantly came off as a bit of a threat as well, to where, again, like had my philosophy on this list been a bit different, she might have been top 10, but again, not on this list. Also, I'll mention Claire Rafeson, who is someone that I think has a lot of potential in the game, but obviously didn't really get to demonstrate any of it. And she is the first boot from her tribe. I'll say, again, one that was kind of booted because of physical strength. And you can definitely chalk that up to her not playing in challenges and building up this reputation that she's not necessary for the tribe. But I still feel, again, it's not enough actively bad play to be in the top 10. Also, I'll mention Josh Wilder, a spot where Josh Wilder definitely would have made the top 10 had I done this back at the time of Survivor 44 when I did my original top player of the new era list. But at this point, again, he doesn't make the top 10. I think he's a player that his game on that season is pretty bad. I mean, while he survives over Claire that initial time, it is, again, largely due to physical strength. And after that, while he's, again, kind of swap screwed, he does play pretty poorly, again, kneeing an idol and creating this, like, feud of Jam, being the Mergatory boot in a spot where he's so expendable. That being said, I feel like Josh has more potential in the game than most of the other people in the top 10. I feel like he's someone that at least had an understanding of the game and survive a tribal and did attempt to, like, build this bond of Carolyn. Carolyn wanting to save him at that first round, where I think there's, like, enough little things there to very barely misses out in the top 10. Next, I move on to Survivor 45, and honorable mention here goes to Hannah. And again, Hannah is a player that I just simply don't know what to do with on these rankings. Simply because she's someone that I think if she wanted to be there, probably has a relatively deep run in her. Like, based on the power structure that we saw, it seemed like Emily would have been the first go, then Brandon, then maybe her after that. And to be fair, again, obviously Lulu was going to tribal over and over and over again. But even in that spot, again, maybe they flip on Caleb like they did in the real life situation. So again, I think Hannah is a player that when we're purely just relegating it to the social strategy aspects of the game, she's not seemingly that bad. The issue is obviously the fact that it is a game played on the island, and through that, she just simply cannot take playing on the island. So again, I don't know what to do with Hannah. Again, in this spot where, again, I'm prioritizing an actively bad play, is her wanting to quit actively bad play. I think that is the big thing that's kind of tough to wrap your head around, but at the end of the day, again, I just felt like it was just easier just to leave her off. Even though, again, it would make sense if she was in the top 10 here. Also, again, considered Brandon Donlin, spot where, again, didn't really have much of a chance on this season, but again, I think a lot of that's due to physical strength. I think he's another one that, again, when it comes to social strategy, I actually think he's a pretty competent player. Again, was well liked by most people, knew the game pretty well. Well, by the time he was taken out, again, there wasn't really much of a chance for him. I do feel like he's, again, was also primed to survive that first round, where, again, I don't think he makes the top 10. Also, I will mention Sean, just because, again, Sean also quit the game. Though, again, I think Sean actually demonstrated a decent amount of skills for the game. Again, survived through the original Lulu, to where, while, again, he was on the outs during that Sabaya vote, even then he was technically tied in numbers. And again, is actually able to recuperate the numbers to potentially save himself during his boot round, only from the quit. But still, again, I think there's enough skill there for him to not make the top 10. Next up, literally number 11 on the list here, we got Sifu. And Sifu is a player that I just find very tough to assess. Now, again, I did say that he played the worst game of 45 on my 45 player ranking. I stand by that. I think his game is pretty bad. It's one where, again, he was going to be the first boot of Reba. Had they ever gone to tribal? At the swap, he was supposed to go home. Got saved by Sean quitting. Then has immunity during the Mergatory round. Though, to be fair, I don't think he goes home there. But still, essentially gets taken out at the first opportunity during the split tribal. Mind you, again, I think he got unlucky at the split tribal in terms of like who he was with. Also, even beyond that, I don't think he would have gone home if there was no split tribal at all. I think he was actually like seemingly starting to pick up the game a bit, to where, again, Sifu's one of these that, again, I think played a really bad game. I think this is purely assessing their game, the game that they played on their season. Sifu's definitely in the top 10 worst. However, I think when assessing him as a player, I feel like Sifu has some skills for a game. While, again, he played too hard from the very beginning and did not really gel well with his original tribe, I feel like he is someone that on any given season would probably do better than the people that are in the top 10. And I did leave him off the top 10. Next, I'm moving on to 46, where I will mention Jelinski. Jelinski's a player here that it was the first boot of his season. And again, you might see the people booted after him on this list. But I feel like Jelinski, again, isn't that bad of a player. Again, I don't feel he does that much actively wrong outside of like pissing off Q, to where Q really fights for him to go. But even again, that's in a spot where, again, I don't really feel like he did that much wrong. And it was still a spot where like Kenzie and Tiffany technically wanted him around. They just didn't feel like it was a fight worth fighting, to where, again, I feel like there are probably worse out there than Jelinski. So again, he didn't make it on. Also, I had to consider Jem, who again was the first boot of her tribe, in a spot where I think she played pretty disastrously. I think the fact that she hides the idol clue and then tries to frame people with it is pretty bad. And she obviously gets taken out the first opportunity, though, again, it's still a spot where, again, she had initial allies. She had Mo. She initially had Maria and Charlie with her. So again, she's the one that definitely was in consideration here, that did not crack the top 10. Then moving on to 47, where, again, consider John Lovett, just first boot. Again, another one, though, I don't feel like he did that much actively wrong. I think he just came into the game with a kind of seemingly high target on his back. People just thinking of him as a smart player. And while I do think, again, he definitely didn't help his case by talking very eloquently at Matt Chat, I don't feel he did as much wrong as the people on the actual list. Also, we'll mention Asia as someone that, again, also taking out the first opportunity. I will say, at least with her, I did feel like she gets very unfortunate by the fact that she goes on the journey, for one. Also, the fact that Rome had advantages that steered people away from voting for him, to where, again, Asia's definitely someone that, again, I considered, but not cracked the top 10. Also, I considered Tiana, who was obviously on the bottom of her original starting tribe for a decent chunk of it, and eventually does go home at the time of the split tribal, though, again, gets somewhat unlucky in how that plays out, with Rachel being saved at the last second, though, again, too fair, I think she probably goes anyway. But again, I think some bad play there, but she still, again, technically was the decision maker for one vote, at least, and did end up surviving that Mergatory vote, so again, she didn't make the top 10. And finally, for 48, I will mention Stephanie, just again, as the first boot. Again, another spot, I don't feel like Stephanie did that much wrong. I feel like she just got a pretty unfortunate tribe breakdown, and one where Say just instantly goes to the men and sides with them. For a while, again, definitely could have played a bit more actively, not enough bad play to be in the top 10. Also, I will mention Kevin, who the swing vote in that first vote, and I think he ultimately makes the wrong decision. But I will criticize his play there, but ultimately, again, not enough to be in the top 10. Now, also, I did consider Star, who obviously made it way deeper into the game. That was also someone that, again, was kind of on the bottom for the entire game. Would have been the first boot from Logi had they gone the tribal, though. I do feel like there are points where Star had the right idea, to where while she was definitely someone that I considered for top 10, she did not make the cut. But then we're down to the top 10. Again, the top 10 worst players of the new era. And we're going to be starting off at number 10 with a player that I actually feel like has a lot of potential. I feel like this is the type of player, they come back, they might be able to course correct their position on this list, though. The way they played their game, did have a decent decent position initially, but then just had such a spectacular downfall to where they ultimately make this list. At number 10, I have Lindsay Carmine from Survivor 43. And again, Lindsay is this player that, again, like was in this initial majority. Again, I remember coming out of the premiere looking at her as a runner to win the game. Again, the fact that she had this alliance with the likes of all the women plus James, and seemed to have this like close bond with James, also seemed to have a close bond to Cassie, to where, again, it seemed like she was primed to do extremely well in the game. And that's really the main gripe with her placement on this list. And it was a major reason why I really contemplated if she should be in the top 10. But again, I just think her flame out is so bad. The fact that she gets so paranoid, turns her allies away, gets Carla and James to actively turn against her. And again, in a spot where it seemed like her and James had a pretty good relationship, where she ends up essentially taking herself out of one of the strongest positions in the game to make her the first boot from her tribe. Where really that ends up being a major reason why she's in the top 10 over certain other people. The fact that, again, she doesn't even survive a single tribal, while also having that disastrous play, to where, while again, I do think she has good play in there, the fact that she is in that majority for those first few rounds, like had they gone to a tribal during those first few rounds, as long as, again, she doesn't have the same meltdown, I feel like she likely does survive those rounds. And I think she is someone that, again, can be a skilled player. She is a massive fan of the show, though I really feel like in comparison to the people that were honorable mentions on this list, I think her play that got her sent home was just so much actively worse. And again, just basing this on what we've seen, not what I'm assuming would happen if she returned, I think her really terrible play at the end has the lander here at number 10. At number 9, and now we're going to be starting off with, again, the part of the list where I said before that this might make the list a bit strange. The fact that we got, again, some players that made it relatively deep into the game on this list. Yeah, at number 9, I'm going to go with Bruce from Survivor 44 and 45. So where, again, obviously can't really assess 44 too much. We're simply going to be talking about 45. And again, Bruce is a player here that I actually debated initially to not put him in the top 10. Initially, actually, Sifu was going to be in the top 10 over him. And to be fair, I think there definitely would be an argument for, again, Sifu was someone that was almost for sure going home at every single opportunity. I feel like Bruce is actually somebody that seemed to actually be okay initially, like during that first round of the game, where it seemed like he didn't piss off his tribe members just yet, though eventually, obviously, he does become one that his tribe just starts to hate, and he does end up putting this massive bullseye on his back. So again, had he gotten to tribal during any of those later rounds in the pre-merge, he almost assuredly goes home. Even at the swap, I think it's a question mark if he goes home or not. Now, mind you, I know Katurah was someone that felt like she was on the bottom, and definitely be her instead, but it does feel like Bruce has just such a massive bullseye on his back. So he's someone that definitely would have been in a lot of danger had he ever gotten to tribal in the pre-merge, then gets to merge in a spot where, again, also annoying people, still a pretty big target there, but ends up being saved by getting immunity. Also in the spot where, again, people know he has an idol as well, which would have potentially saved him as well. Now, I will say the one thing to credit him for is the fact that he does survive the split tribal vote, in a spot where that's actually the only vote in the entire season that he survives without some level of immunity, which is kind of insane. Even there, he's talked about as a potential boot, with his own allies talking about taking him out, which is also kind of insane. Where, again, he's such a valuable weapon for someone like Kelly, someone that she's just so willing to let go. And then from that point on, again, he wins immunities the next couple rounds in a spot where he would have been in danger had he lost those, and is also just kind of aloof at what's going on. Again, is completely blindside when Kelly goes home, when Kendra goes home. He's, again, in on that vote, but it's not like he steered the vote in that direction. And again, eventually gets taken out with an idol in his pocket, with him being so unaware of what's going on there, to where, again, as a whole, Bruce's game is atrociously bad. But again, this is not necessarily an assessment of just his game. It's an assessment also of him as a player. The fact that he is pissing off people so much to where they just actively want him out. And because that he was only able to survive one single round without some level of immunity, even there he was considered as a target, to where I think he's just a player that, again, put him on any given season, I would have no faith in Bruce to go on to win the game. I feel like he's just the type of person that people are going to vote out early almost every single time just because of how annoying he is around the island, where, again, that is the true assessment of why he is on the top 10 here, more so than, again, the fact that his game is bad. Because, again, I think we're just purely rating his game. Again, he at least does make it the final 8. Again, in comparison to other people that we've talked about so far that get taken out their first opportunity or simply don't have that much longevity. Again, Bruce at least has that longevity, but again, it is just how actively bad of a player I feel like he is, which is what leaves him here at number 9. Now, number 8, same thing, like kind of just even worse version of Bruce, even though I think there's probably an argument this person could theoretically be a better player and theoretically be another player. But either way, at number 8, I do have Rome from obviously Survivor 47. And again, Rome is a player that, again, is on this list because of, again, how actively bad he plays. Again, because of how much he annoys people, how much people want him out. The fact that, again, I think he definitely would have been a big target during the Asia vote had he not had any advantages, then proceeds to also be the initial target in the Kishan vote, though ends up being saved by Genevieve saving him, which, again, credit to him for having that relationship with Genevieve. But then again, at the Mergatory, he's a consensus target, No one really tries to save him. Everyone wants him out. Again, that is very bad. And in a spot where he's so aloof to the fact that that's happening. And I think Rome is just this player that, again, I think is, again, up here, again, alongside Bruce, just because of, again, how much they annoyed their tribe members, how much the fellow tribe members wanted them out for pretty much their entire run. Though, again, I think the debate between him and Bruce is actually kind of interesting because I think Rome has higher highs, but Rome also has lower lows than Bruce. Where I think the highs of Rome is the fact that, again, he had someone like Genevieve wanting to keep him around. He had an initial alliance around him that stuck together. Mind you, they stuck together through that first vote simply because of his advantages. But again, had an alliance around him initially, and is actually a player that I think I would actually have more faith in thinking about the game rationally than Bruce. However, in comparison to Bruce, he also, again, does a lot more actively wrong. Again, he does come up with these like schemes to like leak information to all these people, and a spot that's so transparent to where they end up realizing what he's doing. Where again, we see him at the merge, like just go around the people, telling them misinformation that gets him being targeted, and that just increases the target on his back. And him like antagonizing Saul is something that just feels misguided. It just also puts the target on his back from Saul's point of view. The fact that he is just so focused on like needing to get his way, and to the point where his alliance gets annoyed at him, where again, I just feel like Rome does a lot more wrong than Bruce, but also, again, does some things right. And again, that is that dilemma there of Rome, especially considering Rome, again, technically survives 2 tribals. Now, again, does he survive those tribals because of advantages? Kind of, but I still feel, again, he at least made it to Murgatory by surviving some tribals. But again, it is really just like how actively bad he can play at points. The fact that, again, he was just such an easy consensus at the merge. And it's where, again, I cannot imagine Rome actually getting to the end and actually going on to win. While Bruce, again, at least got a little bit further than him. And again, I think has like less actively bad play than Rome. So again, I think Rome ends up landing here number 8. At number 7, moving on to a player that I remember at the time the season's airing, calling this person the worst player of the new era. And again, I don't think that's particularly aged well, especially due to some post-game stuff that's come out that made me reassess his game. But still, a pretty bad player. At 47, I do have TK Foster from Survivor 47. And again, TK's this player here that, again, is this big alpha guy, the sort of guy that you would expect to just have an easy ride through the early portions of the game. And instead, he's the first boot from his tribe. And again, I think that is something that, again, is very bad on paper. The fact that, again, he is this archetype kind of built to survive the early days of the game, and instead just ends up being the first one out instead. And mixing out the fact that, again, based on the show, we see him like calling out Tiana, and that ends up causing Tiana to flip on him. Again, I think based on what we were shown on the episode, I would say, okay, TK's the worst player of all time. Again, someone that had no reason to be the first boot, made himself the first boot. That's very bad. I do think in retrospect, again, looking back on the season, again, he's still bad. Again, he's still someone that, again, probably shouldn't have been the first boot from his tribe. Again, that's pretty egregious, but I still think there are situations around it that make it a little bit more redeemable to not put him at the very top of this list. Again, the first, the fact that I think he gets pretty unfortunate, the fact that he goes on that initial journey in a spot where that seemed to kind of lessen his standing in the game, to where by the time he comes back, it felt like alliances were already formed, and it felt like Sue in particular was somebody that just didn't really want to give him the time of day at that point, to where, again, I do give him a little bit of grace for that. Also, beyond that, when looking at the Tiana situation, it was one where he wasn't directly calling out Tiana, he was more so just saying generally that he's frustrated at those smiling, not knowing that Jeff was referring to Tiana, to where, again, I at least give him a little bit of grace in that, and the fact that it was like some miscommunication. Though again, it's still a spot where obviously his relationship with Tiana was not strong enough to make her want to keep him around. So again, I think there are like some unfortunate circumstances that can kind of excuse how early of a boot he ends up being here, to where, while again, I do think he still plays it pretty poorly, to where never really able to gain any traction in the game. I think at least these excuses here leave him out of being at the very top of the list, being here number 7. Now, number 6, another person that for a while, I've always said that this is the worst player of the new era. I think this is a player that, again, going on my old criteria, would probably be the worst. And the fact that I think there's at least something this person does wrong. This is also a person that I don't know if he does well in most given seasons, and also a person that, again, was the first boot of his season. However, I think when truly assessing his placement in the game, I do think he gets a little bit unfortunate with how things play out. So at number 6, I'm going with Abraham from Survivor 41. And again, Abraham, again, has always been my consensus number 1 pick as the worst player, just because, again, I think he's someone that seems like an easy first boot on most given seasons. Someone that, again, is on the older side of things. Also someone that is a bit domineering at camp. We did see him getting on people's nerves with him bossing people around. Also, he did seem to be pretty aloof to the social dynamics of the tribe. Again, trying to throw Tiffany under the bus in a spot where Tiffany was pretty well insulated, which, to be fair, again, I think Tiffany is someone that, again, you would also kind of expect to be an easy first boot, to where, again, I don't really fault him too much for that. But still, it does show him being kind of aloof to what's actually going on around him. Though, again, I think like TK, though, I would actually give Abraham a little bit of grace here in the fact that I do think Abraham just gets a very bad starting tribe for him. And the fact that, again, he's on a tribe with an all-women's alliance that forms right away, and instantly being on the outs of that. Well, also you have the Sweat and Savvy task that instantly bonds Voce and Xander together, where he's really just left out of everything going on, to where he's just like an easy consensus target at that point. And obviously, again, I think you can still criticize him for like not being able to put the target onto one of Voce or Xander, as again, that would have been the easy thing to do, considering they were away from camp. But I do think, yeah, I think it is kind of an unfortunate situation, just the tribe that he was put on, to where I think had he been put on any other tribe on that season, I think he's probably in a better spot in the game. But I think the Yasa tribe in particular was one that was very much disfavoring to him. After a while, again, I do think he is still, again, seemingly a bad player. He did get on people's nerves. Just an easy consensus target. I feel like, again, the fact that he was such an easy consensus target was kind of brought on by, again, some of these other factors. After a while, I think he's bad again. And again, might still potentially be the bottom ranked person of the new era when I rank every player. I feel like for this list, again, prioritizing actively bad play, I don't feel like he does that much actively bad, especially in comparison to the people we're about to be talking about. So again, for me, he's here at number 6. Now, number 5, weird spot here, as this is a player that I've always said one of the worst players in the new era. However, I did debate over how they fit within the criteria that I set for this video, as I do feel like this is a player that was very bad and had no real longevity, but has, again, some minor strong suits. But I did go Jess Chong from Survivor 46. And again, Jess is just this weird player in the sense that I think there's like a little Hannah Rose aspect to her, in the sense that I think she's someone that's just not really suited for Survivor. I think put her on an island most times, she's going to flame out, not really be able to properly play the game. However, I think she is someone that is still potentially skilled for a social strategy game. I think you put Jess in something like a Survivor org, I think she could do very well in that. However, again, when we're specifically talking about the game of Survivor, which is, again, played on an island, I feel like Jess is just, again, not situated for that sort of game. But again, that alone would not be enough to put her on this list, as again, Hannah has that similar thing, and Hannah's not on the top 10. I think a major difference, though, between her and Hannah is that, again, Hannah was never in danger. Like, Hannah was never going to go home unless she quit the game. Jess was actually in danger the entire time and does go home through more natural means. Mind you, she does survive a tribal against Zielinski, where that's some credit to give her. And I will say, actually, probably the strongest thing to give her some credit for is that she does seem to have a connection with Q. Again, not a true alliance where Q is genuinely wanting to take her deep into the game, but at least like something there. Again, he at least liked her more than Zielinski and at least like pretended to be with her to following around. So at least that's something. And I'll also say, again, credit to her is that she didn't get tricked by the fake idol, to where, again, I think there definitely are like aspects of savviness there from Jess. I just think, again, it's not in a position where she's particularly well acclimated for the game of Survivor. And again, I think the big difference here for me between her and Hannah is just a spot where Hannah, again, was never in danger. Hannah had allies that wanted her in the game. Jess really had neither of those. It's just kind of an easy consensus target by the end, to where I think there's enough bad play there as well, especially within a social strategy means, where, again, the fact that she actually does end up being on the bottom and does get voted out, I think ends up being this difference maker between her and Hannah. While I feel it's more appropriate to put Jess on this list, even though, again, she is a player that I think there are worlds where she does actually turn out to be a competent player, but again, I think those worlds are one where she could survive on the island, and I just don't know if she can. And based on what we were shown, she is, again, just on the bottom the entire time, with people actively wanting her gone. So again, I do think I have to put her here at number 5. Now, number 4. But now we're moving on to a player that I remember at the time this season airing, I called this player one of the worst players, I think, ever. But again, at this point, the number 4 in the new era, that player is Gio. That player is Gio from Survivor 43. And Gio, I do think, is a pretty bad player here. I mean, he's someone that was supposed to be the first boot of his tribe. They'll ultimately get saved by Lindsay kind of having her meltdown, which leads to him staying. But again, in a spot where he's on the bottom of his tribe, he isolates himself alongside Ryan. While he gets to the following round, a spot where, again, it seemed like for a second that he might be able to survive it, he ends up still going home in that spot, in a spot where, again, he seemingly throws himself under a bus by exposing his knowledge's power to Carla, which again, I think spreading the knowledge's power to other people, again, is bad. But I do think for Carla, again, I do question, like, why are you getting rid of him? As, again, this is a very powerful tool for you and your alliance. A spot where Gio did seem undyingly loyal to Carla. And to be fair, again, it's a fault on Gio that he was not able to get Carla to believe that. But still, I do think he was someone that gets taken out kind of misguidedly. But still, again, he does get taken out in a spot where, again, he's on the bottom. His closest ally in Ryan throws the challenge, which is kind of insane. And he just seemed kind of aloof to what was going on. Always thinking he was in the majority, never being fully aware of the game that's going on around him. But again, in comparison to the next person we're talking about, who I actually think is a similar caliber of player, at least he survived the tribal in comparison to that person. that's something, I guess. So again, Gio's here number 4. Now number 3. Going on to the most recent player on this list, I do have Charity from Survivor 48. And again, Charity and Gio are not that far apart from me. I think they are very similar players. Both had a number 1 ally that was actually loyal to them throughout the early portions of the game. And that being, again, essentially their main strong suit in the game. Outside that, again, they were number 1 target from their tribe from the very beginning. Charity would have gone home had the Siva tribe ever gone to tribal at the swap. Also looks like Charity likely goes home if that tribe ever goes to tribal, to where, again, she's just simply on the bottom the entire way, only to eventually be taken out as the consensus emergatory boot in a spot where literally only Mitch was not involved in that plan. And again, I think that is very bad. So again, in comparison to Gio at least survives that one tribal. Charity doesn't. So again, I think that's really the big difference between them there. But beyond that, I don't know if Charity does that much actively wrong in the game, though. Or it just felt like she came off playing a bit too hard. People just found her kind of sketchy from the very beginning, and she was never really able to repair that reputation from that point forward, where it felt like David had it out against her for most of it. And then when she gets to the swap, again, she seemingly had some connections with the people there, but just none to the point where they would actually save her in the game. And obviously you see Eva calling her fake. And where obviously, again, Charity was never really well positioned in the game, was always going to be the first target at any tribal that she would have went to where that's the main reason she is so low on this list. But again, at least she had an ally. At least she had a person that wanted her to stay and was undyingly loyal to her. So again, at least there's that, and that's why Charity's here number 3. Now number 2, and again, the top 2 here, again, 2 really actively bad players, but also 2 players that actually survived tribals. And again, that is the weird thing about this list. Again, normally the bottom of the list would be players that were, again, booted at the first opportunity. Both of these people have survived votes. This first player here actually being someone that seemed to have some influence early on, actually had some allies, but also someone that was just so atrociously bad at the game that at number 2, I'm going to go with Brad Reese. And again, I did not expect Brad to be this high. Again, Brad is someone that, again, survived the tribal, where Sarah goes home. And alongside that, again, initially had allies with, again, the likes of JD, had Jeannie being loyal to him, had a connection with Shan, where, again, he was in this initial majority, and again, does get his target out in Sarah. Mind you, along the way with that, some truly awful play. Again, the fact that he just openly tells Sarah and Shan that, yeah, it's one of you two going home. Again, very bad. Also, the vote almost flips onto him, where Sarah does do this last second pitch that Ricard seemed to be on board with, and trying to pin the target onto him, which is also very bad there. While ultimately it doesn't land on him, again, there's at least a chance of that. And again, a chance of that simply just due to how poorly he played that round. And in his boot round, again, he's in a spot where he has all these advantages, has the Beware advantage, has an extra vote, tells Shan about these things, which again, you would think would gain trust with Shan, only for her to then turn it against him and actually take him out because of this, which I think is also bad. The fact that, again, he was undyingly loyal to Shan, and Shan didn't reciprocate that back. Also, the fact that, again, he had someone like Jeannie, who was undyingly loyal to him, yet he was never undyingly loyal to her. Where, again, I think he just had, obviously, just a massive misread on the social dynamics of the tribe. And to be fair to him, again, he did lose his vote during the tribal that he ends up going home, which ends up being pretty unfortunate for him. But again, he probably would have gone home anyway. And really, in general, I feel like Brad, again, just feels like such an actively bad player. I think whenever I think of Brad, I think of, again, these moments of him running out the sneak up on JD and Ricard, only then come back and then tell his alliance that he's doing these sketchy things. Also, the fact that he tells Sarah and Shan, again, Shan, one of his closest allies, that it's one of you two going home. Again, all this is just such bad play, to where, considering the fact that he also, again, is a relatively early boot, the second boot of the season, Brad's just the type of player that I would really just have no faith in coming to any given season. I think he's just such a scatterbrained sort of player, to where he will attempt these big plays, but it just causes people to be sketched out by him, with him also just not really having the social ability to position himself well enough in the game. So again, I have Brad here number 2. Now number 1, the number 1 worst player of the new era is someone that, again, I did not think this would be the person I would pick. I thought this is a person that, again, while very bad, again, at least survived a couple tribals. I really think that would be enough credit to give him, but ultimately, again, based on the criteria I'm setting especially, I felt like number 1 has to be Banu from Survivor 46. And again, Banu's the type of player I feel like I would typically see people have him as the worst player of the new era, and I would have in my head that I don't think so. Again, he did survive a couple tribals. Again, Q was someone that seemed to want to be keeping him around. He at least has something there. But I think when looking at the criteria here, especially as being the most actively bad play, yeah, I think Banu is the worst. I think Banu is, again, in his spot where, again, he just cannot hide his emotions in the slightest, where it just constantly gets him in trouble. The fact that he just leaks information in spots where his allies can't even trust him. The fact that, again, he didn't really even have true allies to begin with, where I feel like he was initially just kept around just due to the fact that first, Q picked this feud with Jelinski, and then after that, you just had Jess as even more incompetent than him in challenges. Yeah. And Banu is someone that, again, was just kind of a mess all around. And when we literally see the entire tribe just babysitting him and trying to give him advice on how to be a competent player, I think that's really also a big sign. The fact that how bad he is, that's really this joint effort to try to not make him a disaster. But again, he's someone that makes it to the 4th round of the game, Even though, again, to be fair, obviously he was supposed to be voted in the third, and was Randon's medevac that caused him to be saved, only for him to be given a second chance at life, to where he then gets taken out again. Though, again, I'll say, again, obviously got unfortunate the fact that he lost his vote, and through that, again, couldn't play a shot in the dark, and had, like, no leverage with the likes of Q to try to get something going. Still, I mean, again, just a really bad player. Really doesn't seem to have many skills for the game at all. Again, strategically terrible. For a while, unlikable on the offset. Someone that just got on people's nerves. Really showed his emotions on his sleeve. And I think really the only strong suit of him in the game is the fact that he was at least like competent enough in challenges to where people did not want him out right away. But again, he ends up sinking his own game just through, again, how incompetent he really is at the game. To where at the end of the day, I do feel like I have to go with Banu here, number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 worst players of the new era after Survivor 48. Now, again, I will be doing a top 10 best players video in the near future, so stay tuned for that. Beyond that, obviously, just expect more of the same style of content from the channel. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.